I'm Mathis Meyer. I'm currently blessed to be the Dean of Student Success here at UPike.
Wow. And how long have you been connected to UPike?
I'm going on year 9 right now, Rob, so it's been a while. Going for that first decade, right? It feels like a lot longer, but yeah, it's 9 years.
So I suspect that you as a kid did not say, I want to be the Dean of Student Success at a rural school in Eastern Kentucky.
No, that's been my trajectory my whole life. Right? No, obviously not, right? No, so I grew up in Southern Africa. And I think first awareness probably, I love reading. And so I always want to be a writer, you know. I mean, kind of did what other kids do. My dad was in the military, and so I wanted to be a soldier, right? And as I grew up, that was definitely not my forte. I did my jaunt into it, you know. But I think primarily I wanted to be a writer, right? A fisherman, right? I wanted to fish, an angler, no writer. That was my major thing as a kid.
Was there one author or person who you said I really wanted to be like?
Yeah, I mean, actually, kind of, you know, in retrospect, you kind of, when I was younger, a lot of South African writers, right, Breyten, Breitenbach and that, but when I started reading more internationally, I mean, I really liked the author Henry Miller, you know, Nexus and Plexus and Tropic of Capricorn and that stuff, but I was always interested in poetry, so Walt Whitman has always been one of my central favorite poets of all time, and so I want to be a poet, and, you know, frankly, that's what I pursued the first part of my life in the US when I finally made it, yeah. So my undergraduate degree, my first 2 years had a lot to do with literature, a lot of writing. I was an editor for a literary magazine called The Prairie Wind for a while, me and my spouse. And so got to interact with a lot of writers, Gary Snyder, got to know some of these writers, and you know, that's what I wanted to do. So I really started pursuing that life in a way.
So you've had an eclectic background, even educationally, you know, from the lit stuff to now science focused to now higher education leadership. But what would be a dream job for you?
I think dream jobs are difficult, right? So I think, you know, if I think back about what I learned about vocation, so if you talk about calling, right, I think there's a spiritual aspect to calling. And so I remember when I kind of like wondered what I was going to be, I was always, some of the best advice I got is like, do what you love, right? And so if you talk about dream jobs, it's always kind of the job I'm doing or the next step within the job I'm doing, right? And so I think you've got to have not a fluidity, and maybe a fluidity, a plasticity about when that calling comes, right? I don't think there is a calling. I think there's callings, right? There's constant voices that are calling you, and you know those little things. So I don't know if it's one single calling in life. We are multidimensional beings, and I think sometimes our callings can be multidimensional, and there's a part where we satisfy what the universe wants from us, but there's also a part where the universe satisfies what we need at that point in time, right?
So did anything in life happen that shifted you towards this life of education and higher education?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do. I mean, you know, even my fascination with literature is coming from a place where the control of the written word under apartheid in Southern Africa was so important. Why, you know, so the question you ask as a kid, why is the news always censored? Why are the books banned? Why are the plays banned? Why is the music banned? Why can't you have access to these things? And so that kind of like, it's nearly a tritism, if you want to call it, that the pen is mightier than the sword, became incredibly important to me, right? And so one of the only ways, even under apartheid, right, and I'm Caucasian as they come, was that education is truly liberatory, right? It liberates you from where you are. And then when I came to the US, that became obviously clear, right? So when I came here and I first worked factory job, I worked with the foundry, I worked in retail third shift, stocking shelves at night. It became pretty obvious that if I do not embrace education, if I do not pursue education, right, I'm kind of, there's a trajectory there that I cannot really deviate from. So the only deviation that was available for me at that point in time when I came to this country with nothing was education. And so education then becomes truly a liberating factor in one's life, right? I went to a community college. I came to this country with $300. Went to community college, got a scholarship, got a scholarship, got a scholarship, got a scholarship to the level of PhD. And that's where my liberation sat from maybe, and not saying that there's anything wrong, but what I consider to be a pretty mundane dead-end job, right? There was no way forward. I was at the top of where I could be within that realm. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. So when you think about your life or these callings within a call, maybe, if you try to put that in a sentence, you know, Dr. Meyer is called to, or is being called, how would you complete that sentence?
Educate, right? You know, it's kind of this idea that you did not know you were called for something till you do it. And I believe the first time I walked into a classroom and I engaged the class, right, and a class looks up to you, that was my moment, right? That was my light bulb moment, that you realize that you can have effects in the world, right? You can go and fight wars, you can write books, you can do this, but sometimes you can just walk into a classroom and talk to somebody, and that's it, right? It's kind of intoxicating, it's engaging, it grasps you, and so sitting there or standing there or just engaging with people. And so then that becomes your next level of calling, right? Okay, how can I affect change in my students' life and make the world a better place, right? Paulo Freire said, all teaching is a political act. There's truth there. And it's all about social justice. There's truth there too. Now, social justice in this is a bigger one, right? It's been as liberating to me as I hope it's been to my students, but I think that's where it's at, right? And so then you're like, where do I affect bigger change? Well, in my case, it was like, can I step up and affect bigger change within the higher education? And this is why I'm a Dean of Student Success. This is why I do things like, you know, the Center for Cognitive Diversity. We're trying to start our Center for Academic Excellence, right? How do we affect even larger and larger change? Classrooms are small, right? In many cases, 24 students. Now you step it to 48, you step out, you step out, you step out. And so your calling, although it looks like it's the same thing, it's just another level of it.
So you've had a huge hand in some people's lives, you know, life-changing as an educator, but who's influenced you to guide you on to discover this call?
Well, I mean, and I think it's many people at different places, but if I have to call kind of the seminal influence there, what was probably my father. I really think he was always like, always do something where you're not constantly watching a clock, and you can't be but successful, right? It's when you do something where you constantly have an eye on the clock, you know, constantly, that means you don't want to be there, you know. And I think you share this with me, or in the past we've shared this, we kind of like this idea of recovering from being a workaholic. Mm-hmm. You know, the line between being a workaholic and somebody that's very dedicated to what they do is very, very thin. You know when we overstep that boundaries, but I've never, in what I currently do, have watched the clock, which means sometimes, you know, we're here for very long hours, we don't leave. Even if we leave, we go and get our families, we come back, right? And so I think there's an element of that there that's important to me. And so we always said, find something that you love, that you not constantly watch the clock. And if you look at the people we know in all these different callings, that's what they do. Be it an artist, be it a writer, you know, be it a scientist, be it a researcher, be it a doctor, be it a chaplain, be it a teacher. If you're not constantly watching the clock, you are doing truly something you love, you know. And so I think that's what he always said. And it brings joy. I mean, my work has brought me great joy. It still brings me joy every day. You know you need to move on when you don't want to come in the morning anymore. Now, one or twice is okay, but if it's every day a slog just coming in, I think it's maybe time to move on. But I do think we're at an era where the days where people start, work for 40 years, gets a golden watch and go home is gone forever. I think the plasticity and the fluidity with which we can move between these things that we love is much easier. I think it's going to be easy for our children too. I do think it comes with complications. You know, I think students often struggle finding that thing, right? And it might not be one thing. You know, this idea of what they call the gig economy and the gig movement, and I think people need to be flexible. You know, we're training students for jobs that don't even exist. Yeah.
So, if someone was watching this video and they said, wow, like you are doing exactly what I want to do, what did you do to position yourself for this path?
Yeah, I think that's the harder part, right? I do think serendipity plays a role in much of what we do, and in my case it definitely did. You know, in retrospect you think you're in the right place at the right time, but then you figure out you've been working towards it all the time in doing what you do. And so the trajectory is difficult. I think one of the things that makes me, specifically in the position I'm currently, that gives me an advantage, is the fact that I was a faculty member for many years. So I understand the complication and the stresses that's on our faculty. I understand the life of a faculty member, the complications of what a faculty member does, which you then can leverage, right, in providing support for students. Because I know what faculty do, I also often know where the gaps are. And so if you can get into the gaps, that you don't make faculty feel obsolete, right? So you don't have an issue there, but you still benefit students in the long run. And then, you know, for the rest of my life, I'll always be a student. It's not that I stopped being a student when I got my degree. We're students of life, we're students of higher education, we're students of whatever you're interested in. And I think if you keep that perspective and ask sometimes, what can I do better? But positioning that, or you know, unfortunately in my case, I don't see a trajectory that I mean, I think anybody can go and get a degree in educational leadership, really pursue this, but in my case it was just, you know, a confluence of the great universe, and I've been blessed. So I'm not sure how I would tell somebody to pursue this. Get into higher education, find what you love in higher education, and then just work towards this. So it's kind of a new field too, you know that. And so, but it's just a natural extension of how higher education's evolving, I think. That might not be a very clear answer, though.
Well, it's a very honest answer, and I know that you've been known for being very, very honest and deeply committed to your students, being a life-changing educator, one who students come to and they say, hey, I'm in a bind, I really need some help. And when they come and they say they have no idea about life, studies, you name it, what do you say? How does a person figure out what they're called to?
Well, I think, you know, I mean, if a student comes in at that point, usually they've done some serious like introspection already, and they just can't find that spark. And so the first thing is probably take a very, very deep breath. And I think it's very different for students in different positions. If a first-year student, I'm usually take a deep breath and just hold on, and take the ride through your general education a little bit. Because I oftentimes think that educators are transformative. And so if you find the right spot, and I can tell you a little story. So my undergrad degree is primarily in literature. At the end of my junior year, I took a class with a gentleman named Stuart Allison. Taught me a class in conservation biology and changed my life. Changed my major, changed everything. And so I think there's something there that serendipity, and the way I use the term serendipity is oftentimes not serendipitous, it's just your path in life. And so I think being open, exposing yourself and exploring, really going out there and figuring it out, you know. We had a student at this institution, I know you knew him, that wanted to go into the medical sciences, right? Young student. Every weekend, every Monday he came and his fingers were covered in grease. Wasn't academically being too successful. I said, what do you want to do? And he says, I want to rebuild engines. I do it every weekend. And I said, go and rebuild engines, right? And he did go and rebuild engines. I mean, he was not here for the right reasons. And so I think students also need to ask them, why am I trying to do what I think I want to do, right? And there's an honesty that comes there, oftentimes with maturity. I mean, we oftentimes feel pressures from other individuals to get us, and that's it. Have open and honest conversation with the people that are most important in your life. Parents, grandparents, friends, family, teachers, guides, mentors, and say, where do you see me? I'm struggling with this. And I think lean into that kind of, more and more the older I'm getting, lean into your vulnerabilities and ask, if you're a spiritual person, if you're a religious person, pray, meditate, reflect, and find that. And I honestly believe that everybody will find their way. Here's the secret. I'm a middle-aged man before I truly found what I believe I'm called to do right now. But next month I might see something else. And I'm not saying, I don't mean that in a facetious way that we are wobbly, flobbly, or flip-floppy. I mean that in the way that if you see an opportunity for something that you want to engage with and be passionate about, you can, right? Everything I've done in a way has led to teaching, higher education. And I think if I was to leave here, I would still probably be involved in teaching, likely in higher education or some form of education. And so my advice would be, don't rush it, don't force yourself, right? Even if we often, and you experience this too, we often see students that believe at 19 they should know exactly what they're going to do for the rest of their life, and unfortunately oftentimes we see it's not true, and so I think find your way, right? If the sun is at the top of the mountain, there's many ways around the mountain and up the mountain and through the mountain, but eventually you will get there. Don't feel rushed and don't freak out too much.